The mayor was on his knees, trembling, crying. A cold gun pressed deep into his back, and one by one, dragged his tongue across the muddy shoes of a pregnant woman, the same pregnant woman he had humiliated hours before. This is not fiction. Let me tell you exactly what happened. There are people in this world who command a room just by walking into it, not because they are loud, not because they scream or threaten, but because everyone in that room already knows what they are capable of. Bumpy was that kind of man, his real name. Nobody used it, not anymore. Bumpy had earned his name years ago, and the story behind it was one that people whispered about in dark corners, never to his face. He was not a politician. He was not a businessman in a suit. He was someone who operated in the spaces where the law did not reach, where deals were made in silence, and where a man's word was worth more than any contract signed in a courtroom. Bumpy grew up in the poorest part of town. His father left when he was 7. His mother worked 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. He learned early that no one was going to hand him anything. The world was brutal, and if you wanted to survive in it, you had to become something that the world would think twice before trying to destroy. By the time he was 25, T had built something. Not an empire, not the kind you see on television, but influence, real influence. The kind where local shop owners paid him respect. The kind where, if there was a conflict in the neighborhood, people came to him before they went to the police. He was a fixer, a protector, someone who kept order in a place that had none. He was not a good man by everyone's definition. T was loyal. He was fair in his own way. And the one absolute line that Bumpy had drawn in his life was this: you do not touch the people he loved. You do not disrespect them. You do not look at them sideways. Because if you did, the consequences were not something anyone walked away from easily. And soon, the mayor was going to learn exactly why people feared Bumpy. Mayor Richard Callahan had been in power for 11 years. 11 years of shaking hands at ribbon cuttings. 11 years of smiling for cameras. 11 years of making promises he never kept. And not a single person in this town had the power to stop him. He came from old money. His family had controlled the political landscape of this town for generations. His father was a mayor before him. His grandfather owned half the land the town was built on. Richard did not earn his position through hard work or vision. He inherited it, the same way he inherited his arrogance. Callahan was the kind of man who believed the rules simply did not apply to him. He drove through red lights without a second thought. He spoke to waiters, janitors, and anyone he considered beneath him with open contempt. He had never once been challenged in a way that made him uncomfortable, not truly. His wealth insulated him. His family name protected him. And his position made him untouchable. Or so he believed. What Callahan did not understand, what men like him never understand, is that true power is not always visible. It is not always the man in the biggest office or the tallest building. Sometimes the most dangerous power in a town belongs to the man that everyone else is too afraid to name out loud. Callahan knew of Bumpy. The way a wolf knows a bear exists somewhere in the forest. He was aware, but he did not respect the threat. He had never had a reason to. No one had ever shown him that his title, his money, or his name could be stripped away in a single night. That was about to change. Her name was Sarah, and if Bumpy was the storm, Sarah was the calm before it. She was 29 years old, with soft eyes and a quiet laugh that could fill an empty room. She was not involved in Bumpy's world, not by choice and not by curiosity. She simply loved him the way some people love someone, not because of what they do, but because of who they are when no one else is watching. Sarah had a gentleness. To her, that was almost out of place in the life Bumpy lived. She volunteered at the local shelter on weekends, She brought food to the elderly woman who lived 3 doors down. She smiled at strangers. She was, in every way, the opposite of the darkness that surrounded Bumpy's reputation. And she was 5 months pregnant. This was the part of his life that Bumpy guarded most fiercely. Sarah and the baby growing inside her, they were the reason. He did everything. They were the reason he stayed disciplined. They were the reason he kept his word, kept the peace, and kept his enemies at a distance. She was his reason for existing. Anyone who knew Bumpy understood this. His people knew it. The town knew it. Even those who feared him knew that hurting. Sarah was the one act that would unleash something no one wanted to see. Mayor Callahan did not know this. Or if he did not care. He was about to learn the difference between ignorance and stupidity. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The sky was gray and a light rain had been falling on and off since morning, turning the unpaved roads into rivers of wet mud. Sarah was walking back from the market, a small bag of groceries in one hand, the other resting gently on her belly the way pregnant women do when the world feels just a little too loud. She was on the main road, the same road the mayor drove every day to get to his office. Same road that had been promised a proper paved job for 3 years, a promise Callahan himself had made during his last campaign. The road was still dirt, still broken, still a mess every time it rained. And then it happened. The black car came around the corner, fast, too fast. Mayor Callahan's car, a luxury vehicle that cost more than most families in that neighborhood. Made in a year. The front tires hit a deep pool of muddy water at full speed, and a massive wave of thick, brown mud sprayed across the sidewalk like a wall. Sarah had no time to move. The mud hit her shoes, her dress, her legs, soaking her. From the knees down, it splattered across the fabric that hung over her pregnant belly. It was everywhere, cold, dirty, humiliating. The car did not slow down, it did not stop, but the window rolled down. And Mayor Callahan looked at her, looked directly at her, and laughed. A loud, open, deliberate laugh. He said nothing. Did not need to. The laugh said everything. It said, "I see you. I did this, and I do not care." Then the window rolled back up, and the car drove away. Sarah stood there, mud dripping off her shoes, rain falling on her face, her hands shaking, not from the cold, but from the humiliation, from the shock, from the fact that a man with that much power had looked at her, a pregnant woman, alone on a street, and treated her like she was less than the dirt beneath his wheels. She did not cry. Not yet. She walked home in silence, her shoes squelching with every step. And she sat down on the porch and stared at nothing for a long time. She was waiting for Bumpy to come home. Bumpy walked through the door at 6 that evening. The first thing he noticed was the shoes. Sarah's shoes, sitting by the door, caked in dried mud. The second thing he noticed was Sarah herself, sitting on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her eyes red but dry. He did not ask what happened right away. He closed the door. He sat down next to her. And he waited. Sarah told him everything. Not with emotion, she had already moved past that stage. She told him with a calm, steady voice. The car, the mud, the window rolling down. The laugh. The way Callahan had looked at her like she was nothing. Bumpy listened. He did not move. He did not interrupt. His face did not change, not visibly, but something behind his eyes shifted. Something quiet and cold and absolute. The kind of shifted people who had been around Bumpy long enough would recognize immediately. It was not anger. Anger is loud. Anger is reactive. What Bumpy felt in that moment was something far more dangerous. It was clarity. It was the kind of calm that descends on a man when he has already decided exactly what is going to happen next, and he knows, with complete certainty, that nothing in the world is going to stop it. He kissed Sarah on the forehead. He told her she was safe. He told her it was going to be okay. And then he stood up, walked into the other room, and made 3 phone calls. The first call was to one of his men, a quiet, efficient man who handled problems without asking too many questions. The second call was to someone who knew the mayor's schedule, his habits, his routes. The third call was to no one important. It was simply to confirm something small. A detail. By the time Bumpy hung up the phone, the plan was already in motion. Mayor Callahan did not know it yet, but his life had just changed forever. Bumpy did not rush. That was the thing about him that frightened people the most. He did not act on impulse. He did not show up at the mayor's office screaming. He did not make a scene in public. He did not do any of the things a lesser man would. Instead, he sent a message the next morning. When Mayor Callahan arrived at his office, he found a single envelope on his desk. No signature, no return address. Inside was one piece of paper with one sentence written on it in clean, careful handwriting. You touched something you should not have. Tonight, you will fix it. Callahan read the note. He read it twice. And then he did what men like him always do when they are confronted with something they do not understand. He laughed it off. He crumpled the paper and threw it in the trash. He told his assistant it was probably some disgruntled local who was upset about a pothole or a zoning decision. He genuinely did not believe anyone in this town had the power to threaten him. This was his fatal mistake. He did not connect the note to the mud. He did not connect it to the woman on the road. He did not connect it to Bumpy at all, because in his mind, men like him did not answer to men like Bumpy. The hierarchy was clear, at least in his own head, but power does not always announce itself with a title. And that night, Callahan was going to learn this lesson in the most brutal way possible. It was after midnight when they came for him. Callahan was alone in his home, a large, sprawling house at the end of a private road, surrounded by tall trees that blocked out most of the world. He was sitting in his study, a glass of whiskey in his hand, reading something on his phone. The house was dark and quiet. He felt safe. He always felt safe. The front door opened without a sound. By the time Callahan looked up, there were already 2 men in the room. He did not know them. He had never seen their faces before, but the way they moved, silent, practiced, purposeful, told him everything he needed to know. These were not ordinary men. These were men who did this kind of work regularly. Before he could stand, before he could speak, a hand pressed his shoulder firmly back into the chair. The glass of whiskey was taken from his hand and set on the table. And then a voice spoke. From behind him, a voice he had never heard before, but would never forget. Stand up. Callahan stood. His legs were shaking, but he tried to hide it. He turned around and saw Bumpy for the first time up close. Not on the street, not from a distance, face to face. And in that moment, Callahan understood something. He had never understood before what it felt like to be genuinely afraid of another human being. Bumpy said nothing at first. He simply looked at him. Then he gestured toward the door, and Callahan was guided outside into the cold night air onto the gravel driveway, where a single pair of shoes had been placed on the ground. They were Sarah's shoes, the ones she had worn that Tuesday afternoon, the ones still stained with mud. A gun was pressed firmly into the small of Callahan's back. The message was clear. No words were needed. But Bumpy spoke them anyway, quietly, so only the mayor could hear. Get on your knees and lick them clean. Callahan looked at the shoes. He looked at Bumpy. He looked at the gun. And then, slowly, Painfully, Mayor Richard Callahan, the most powerful man in town, dropped to his knees on the cold gravel and began to drag his tongue across the muddy leather. It took him 20 minutes. He did not stop once. By morning, the mayor's reputation was gone. Bumpy did not need to broadcast what had happened. Word spread the way it always does in a small town, quietly whispered from one person to the next until everyone knew. Some people had seen the mayor leaving his house that night, disheveled and shaking. Others saw the aftermath, the way Callahan could not look anyone in the eye for weeks afterward. He did not go to the police. He could not, because if he told them what happened, he would have to explain why. He would have to explain the mud. He would have to explain the pregnant woman. He would have to explain that the most powerful man in town had laughed at a defenseless, pregnant woman on a public street, and that the town would have seen him for exactly what he was. Callahan resigned from his position 3 months later. He cited personal reasons. No one believed him. Everyone knew the truth, or at least everyone knew enough of it to understand that something had broken inside him that night. Something that could not be repaired. Bumpy never spoke about it publicly. He did not need to. Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby boy 2 months later, okay? And Bumpy held his son in his arms and felt something he had never felt before. Peace. True peace. The town moved on, but no one forgot. And no one, not a single person, ever looked at a pregnant woman on that road the same way again. So what do we take from a story like this? On the surface, this is a story about revenge. 8. Man was wronged, his wife, his family, his pride, and he made the person responsible pay for it. And there is a part of every single one of us that watched this unfold and felt satisfied. We felt it when the mayor dropped to his knees. We felt it when the gun pressed into his back. We felt it when the humiliation was reversed. Because deep down, we all want to believe that the people who abuse their power will eventually face consequences. But let us be honest about what this story really is. This is a story about what happens when power goes unchecked. Mayor Callahan had 11 years in office. 11 years where no one stopped him. 11 years where his arrogance grew like a disease because the system around him allowed it. He was never held accountable. Not by the courts, not by the voters, not by anyone. And so he became something monstrous. This is also a story about the people who are invisible to those in power. Sarah was not a criminal. She was not a threat. She was a pregnant woman walking home from the market. And to Callahan, she was less than nothing. That is what unchecked power does to the way people see the world. Great. It strips others of their humanity. And finally, this is a story about the kind of justice that the system cannot always provide. Was what Bumpy did right? By the law? No. What he did was illegal. It was violent. It was intimidation. But in a world where the law often protects the powerful and abandons the vulnerable, people like Bumpy exist for a reason. They exist because someone has to draw a line. The mayor drew his line when he laughed at that pregnant woman. Bumpy drew his when he decided that laugh would have consequences. The question this story leaves you with is this: not whether Bumpy was right or wrong, but whether the world would be a better or worse place if every person who abused their power knew that someone somewhere was watching. Someone who would not forgive, someone who would not forget, and someone who would make sure the debt was paid. If you made it this far, you already know the answer. Make sure you subscribe, hit that notification bell, and leave a comment below, telling me what would you have done if you were Bumpy. I want to hear your answer.